History remembers triumphs and treaties, wars and revolutions. But between the lines of textbooks, beneath the stones of ancient streets, and within the faded ink of forgotten manuscripts, something else lurks. Not legend, not myth, but truth, twisted, buried, and trembling with dread. There are places in this world that carry more than memory. They echo, and those echoes speak of things no living soul was meant to hear. It begins in Poveglia, an island in the Venetian lagoon, too cursed for maps and too silent for stories. But silence is deceiving. Beneath the overgrowth and crumbled hospitals lie ashes, the remains of over 100,000 plague victims, dumped, burned, and buried without ceremony during the Black Death. Doctors in beaked masks stalked the halls of its lazaretto, branding the sick with red-hot irons, discarding the dying like broken dolls. When the plague waned, the screams did not. Locals whispered of shadows that moved without wind, cries that echoed from boarded windows, and boats that drifted back unmanned. In 1922, the Italian government reopened the island. A psychiatric hospital was built atop the ruins, where the wailing never ceased. Patients muttered about faceless men and weeping women. The head doctor, fascinated by the island's aura, conducted experiments, crude lobotomies, sensory deprivation, and solitary confinement in the plague pits. He claimed it was therapy, but in 1947 he leapt from the bell tower, gibbering of demons and those that watch beneath. His body was never recovered. Poveglia was sealed off. Today, it is forbidden. The soil is still blackened by ash. Fishermen refuse to cast nets near its shores, fearing what might rise instead of fish. And on moonless nights, a bell tolls from the tower, though the bell was removed decades ago. But Poveglia is not alone. History is riddled with similar wounds, places where trauma soaked into the stone, where pain became permanent. Each scar carries a name. Each echo tells a truth. In 1572, France witnessed the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. What began as a royal wedding in Paris turned into a week of sanctioned slaughter. Over 10,000 Huguenots were murdered in the streets, alleys, and even sanctuaries. Their blood stained the Seine red for days. Yet centuries later, residents of Rue de l'Arbalète spoke of phantom footsteps and screams that rose with the fog. A fire in 1893 revealed a bricked-up chamber behind a tenement wall. Inside, rows of 16th-century bones, entombed upright, arms stretched skyward. In the Carpathian Mountains, the forests of Hoia Baciu whisper in voices not their own. In 1968, a military technician captured a photo of a disc-like object above the tree line. Soon after, entire patrol units vanished on maneuvers. Survivors described sudden disorientation, missing time, and an oppressive silence that seemed to press into the skull. The forest predates modern history, but local records speak of shepherds who walked into the woods and were never seen again. Not even their dogs returned. These are not ghost stories. They are documented, investigated, forgotten, not because they were fantasy, but because they were too real, too disturbing. The world isn't kind to truths that unsettle the foundation of what we call reality. And so, the echoes grow louder. Not confined to old parchment or oral lore, but spreading into the dreams of the curious, into the footage of thrill-seeking explorers, into the quiet hours of those who dare to listen. They aren't just remnants of the past. They are warnings, traces of something that hasn't died because it was never alive to begin with. This is the beginning, a descent into the places history left behind, not out of oversight but out of fear. Each chapter deeper, each truth darker, each echo louder. What follows is not fiction. It is history's most haunted truths. There is a house in England, near the edge of Suffolk, cloaked in ivy and shadow. It has no name, only a whispered reputation, the house that remembers. Its history doesn't begin with construction, but with fire, a blaze in 1677 that reduced half the village to ash. Among the ruins stood a manor, untouched by flame yet steeped in smoke, its windows blackened not by soot, but by something older, something waiting. It was built in 1542 by the Pendle family, merchants who grew fat on the wool trade. But by 1601, the entire bloodline was gone, consumed by illness, accident, and madness. The last Pendle heir was found in the cellar, her eyes gouged out with her own fingernails, her mouth stuffed with black feathers. The house was abandoned for nearly a century. In 1738, it was purchased by a physician named Aldous Wren, a rational man, a man of science. Within weeks, his wife fled barefoot into the snow, raving of rooms that breathe. Aldous was found some days later, face down in the upstairs nursery, his body unmarked, but his organs liquefied, a medical impossibility. The next owners, a clergyman and his two daughters, Wamai or I, stayed only 6 nights. The elder daughter scratched scripture into the walls with a fork until her hands bled. The younger never spoke again. She died in an asylum in Kent, whispering the same word over and over. Remember. The house was eventually removed from registries. Locals would not pass it after sundown. Birds avoided its eaves. Children dared each other to touch the rusted gate. No one ever made it past the porch. In 1954, a team of parapsychologists from Cambridge attempted to document the phenomena. They brought instruments, recorders, and rations for 10 days. By dawn of the 3rd day, the team's lead, Dr. Kenneth Hollow was discovered in the orchard, babbling in Latin and chewing through his own tongue. One of the team members vanished entirely. The rest refused to speak of what occurred. The tapes recovered from beneath a floorboard were never released. But the last audible sound on reel 3 was the unmistakable giggle of a child, followed by 4 slow knocks, and silence. The house stands still, empty, yet never vacant. There are no squatters, no trespassers, because the house does not permit them. It is said the interior rearranges itself at night, staircases twisting, doors vanishing, mirrors shifting their reflections. Time does not behave normally inside. Watches stop. Photographs blur. Visitors report dreams of being buried alive, of weeping angels at their bedside, of drowning in a sea of dust. This is not simply a haunted house. It is an organism, alive in some unnatural way, feeding off memory, off fear, off the act of remembrance itself. To speak of the house is to invite it. To dwell upon its story is to become part of it. And over time, its legend has twisted into something more than myth, something viral, like a thought that implants itself and grows roots. But this is not unique. The world holds many places like it, where location and emotion have fused, creating something permanent. The Winchester House, built in endless confusion to ward off spirits. The Myrtles Plantation, said to house the echoes of murdered slaves and poisoned children. And even further back, the caves of Delphi, where the oracle spoke in tongues, not divine, but damned. Each structure, each place becomes a vessel, a container for unresolved history, tragedies so immense, so unjust, they cannot pass into silence. They remain, looping endlessly, seeking recognition, demanding remembrance. That is what haunts us. Not ghosts with chains or glowing eyes, but the permanence of suffering. The echo of pain so deep it rewrites the land itself. We like to think buildings forget, That time erases, but the house on the edge of Suffolk remembers, and it is not the only one. In the heart of Germany lies the medieval town of Bamberg, a city of spires and secrets. At first glance, it is a place of cobbled beauty, its cathedrals pristine, its bridges elegant, its silence peaceful. But that silence was born of fire, and in the quiet, something still lingers. Bamberg is haunted not by ghosts, but by history itself. A chapter so soaked in fear, it twisted the soul of an entire town. Between 1626 and 1631, Bamberg became the epicenter of one of the most savage witch hunts in European history. Nearly 1,000 people were tortured and executed, men, women, children, all accused of sorcery in the name of righteousness. But the darkness went deeper than religious fervor. It was systemic. It was bureaucratic. It was industrialized horror. At the center was Prince Bishop Johann Georg II Fuchs von Dornheim, known as the Witch Bishop. He built a prison called the Drudenhaus, the Witch's House, with chambers designed solely for torment, iron chairs, spiked collars, thumb screws. Here, confessions were not discovered. They were extracted. One by one, neighbors turned on neighbors. Friends betrayed friends. Under duress, accused witches would name others, creating a web of suspicion that engulfed entire families. Children as young as 7 were burned, entire bloodlines extinguished. The cathedral bells rang each morning before executions, a sound so routine it blurred into the rhythm of life. But some say those bells never stopped. Centuries later, caretakers and clergy have reported faint ringing from within locked towers, especially near midsummer when the air hangs heavy and the river runs slow. Locals call it Die Glocken der Schuld, the bells of guilt. The cathedral crypt holds more than bones. In 1894, renovations uncovered a sealed room behind the apse. Inside, scorched manuscripts, trial records that had been ordered destroyed. But also something else, a child-sized iron mask, fused to the floor by rust and age. No origin, no explanation. Bamberg today is quiet, but its archives are dense with whispers. Tourists are told of beer cellars and Baroque fountains, but wander off the main paths and you'll find alleyways where no birds sing, rooms where compasses spin, shadows that linger too long. And then there's the statue, hidden deep within the Diocesan Museum, an angel carved from black oak holding a broken sword. Beneath its feet, a plaque etched with names, not saints, not donors, but those condemned by the witch bishop's courts, a list of the forgotten, restored by an anonymous hand. What lingers in Bamberg isn't a specter. It's a memory, rehearsed endlessly by the land itself. The ground remembers the flames. The walls remember the screams. The air still carries the dust of broken justice. There are no hauntings here, only unfinished mourning. This pattern is not unique to Bamberg. Salem, Trier, Würzburg, towns whose soil turned black with paranoia. History tries to close the book, but some chapters refuse. They bleed through, surfacing in the form of inexplicable chills, recurring dreams, and that persistent sense that something unseen is watching. Not malevolently, just remembering. And maybe that's the most terrifying idea of all, that these places don't want to hurt us. They simply want us to know, to witness, to carry the memory forward so it isn't lost to dust and revision. In the center of Bamberg, near the old market square, stands a well. It once ran red with blood. Today it's dry. But if you lean close, some say you'll hear it. Not water, not wind, but whispering. History does not forget, and neither do its victims. There is a sound buried in the Baltic Sea. beneath salt and shipwreck, in the cold, crushing depths where light forgets to go. It is not the roar of current or the groan of metal. It is softer, human, as if a choir sings beneath the waves, long after it should have gone silent. In 1495, a wooden ship named Marienkrone left the port of Lübeck, bound for Stockholm. On board, nobles, clergy, and singers, over 100 passengers attending the wedding of a Scandinavian prince. It was a voyage of celebration, marked by music and prayer. But 3 days in, they vanished. No storm was recorded, no wreckage washed ashore. The sea, indifferent, swallowed the ship whole. For centuries, the Marienkrone was a ghost story, told by sailors. Until 1967, when sonar mapping for a Soviet submarine program picked up something strange. A perfectly preserved hull, deep off the coast of Gotland, resting like a corpse in a glass coffin. Divers were sent. What they found defied explanation. The ship's interior was intact, tables still set, candles melted to the bone, and in the central chamber, the choir. 77 skeletons seated in pews, mouths open, robes rotted, but recognizable. No signs of violence, no water damage, as if they had simply stopped breathing mid-hymn and waited, unmoving, for 5 centuries. The Soviet team sealed the report, but whispers escaped. In 1991, Swedish researchers returned. The wreck was still there, but now the hull had split, revealing a secondary chamber beneath the chapel. Inside, a circle of stone tablets inscribed with markings that predate Christianity. Symbols known to few, feared by many. Runes not meant to be spoken aloud. And then there's the recording, a 6-minute audio captured by the submersible's hydrophones. It begins with static, then a low hum, then harmony. Human voices, male and female, wordless but mournful. A dirge without language. Experts dismissed it as sonar distortion, but those who've heard it never forget the sound. Some report hearing it again. At night, under running water, or just before sleep takes hold. Locals believe the Marienkrone was cursed, that the priests on board brought something with them, a relic, a text, an idea too old and too dangerous. The choir, they say, did not drown. They were silenced, and yet their song continues. Maritime historians began to catalog other disappearances along the same trench. Ships gone without distress calls, crews found intact but mute, staring skyward with wide, bleeding eyes. One vessel, the Rosenlicht, drifted into harbor in 2003. Its logbook ended mid-sentence. They are at the bow, singing, but no one is there. The ocean is Earth's oldest graveyard. Beneath every wave lies a secret. But some are louder than others, and some refuse to stay buried, like the Titanic's sister ship, the Britannic, whose wreck divers have described hearing faint music near its ballroom. Or the SS Aurang Medan, found adrift in 1947, its crew dead with faces frozen in terror, hands clawing at their own throats. We imagine ghosts in graveyards and abandoned homes. But the sea is more ancient than any house. It remembers longer, and its ghosts are stranger, hungrier. The Marienkrone has not moved since it sank, but its voice travels, through sonar, through water, through dreams. It calls out not in pain, but in warning. A warning sung in perfect, chilling harmony. Some say the choir sings not because they were lost, but because they were found by something deep, something that listens. So the next time you stand near the shore, when the tide pulls at your feet and the wind hums in your ear, listen carefully. You may hear it too. The choir of the drowned, still echoing, waiting to be remembered. There is a room, locked beneath Prague's oldest monastery, that has no official record, no key, no map. Yet every scholar in the city has heard its name, whispered, not spoken. They call it the Devourer's Archive. Clementinum Library is known for its beauty, gilded halls, frescoed ceilings, ancient tomes stacked like relics of forgotten gods. But beneath the grand facade lies a different archive, one not built to preserve knowledge, but to imprison it. Hidden behind a false wall in the basement stacks, there's a spiral stair descending into lightless stone. Those who found it describe the air as thick, as if time itself struggles to breathe there. The room below is circular. Books line the walls from floor to ceiling, none bearing titles. Bound in dark leather, stitched not with thread, but something more sinewy. Each volume hums faintly, vibrating with an internal rhythm, like a heartbeat. When opened, the pages shift. Not in words, but in images, visions, whole lifetimes, moments of terror lived by others, imprinted into the paper itself. Readers don't remember turning pages. They remember living them. The Jesuits who once ran the library called these memory relics, records of extreme psychic trauma. Burnings, betrayals, wars, executions, not written, but imprinted, as if the emotion itself etched into the page through sheer force. The process remains unknown. But one thing is clear. Those who spend too long reading do not return the same, if they return at all. In 1787, a Czech historian named Jan Novak was granted special access. He entered with ink, scrolls, and 2 assistants. He stayed 6 days. When the monks opened the door, Novak was seated, smiling at the wall, his eyes sewn shut by his own hand. The assistants were never found. Novak died weeks later, whispering a single phrase. The book knew my name. During World War II, the Nazis raided the Clementinum in search of occult texts. They discovered the chamber, but not its purpose. Only one officer descended. His name was Emil Hartz. According to post-war records, Hartz emerged 31 minutes later, saluting a blank wall, calling it Reichsführer. He shot himself that night in the chapel upstairs. After the war, the chamber was sealed, but the books remained. No one dared remove them. Archivists who handled them experienced nightmares for weeks, vivid dreams of strangers dying in places they'd never been. One man dreamt of drowning every night for a month, coughing up salt water in the morning. He had never seen the ocean. The theory is this: intense suffering can leave behind a psychic residue. A moment so horrific, so emotionally charged, it imprints itself onto physical matter. Most fade, but some, preserved in ritual, soaked in fear, become permanent. The books in the archive are not histories. They are experiences, echoes you don't read, but absorb. And they are hungry. In 2009, a fire alarm led a maintenance worker into a forgotten corridor beneath the library. What he described was impossible, a staircase that spiraled downward far longer than the building allowed. He heard chanting in a language he couldn't identify. When he turned to flee, he found himself back at the top, though his watch had advanced by 4 hours. He resigned the next day. 3 weeks later, he disappeared. The Vatican denies knowledge of the chamber. Yet a sealed letter dated 1803, signed by Pope Pius VII, warns of a Czech vault of blasphemous memory wherein dwell records man was not meant to carry. But we still seek them, still hunger for forgotten knowledge, still open doors meant to stay closed. Perhaps that's the lesson of the Devourer's Archive. Not that the past haunts us, but that we haunt it, digging where we shouldn't, reading what should remain unsaid. And when we do, the books don't scream. They listen. In the northern countryside of Romania, nestled between decaying pines and forgotten fields, stands a crumbling stone sanatorium. It has no official designation, no marker on any map. Locals simply call it Spitalul Feranum, the nameless ward. Constructed in the early 1900s under the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was originally a tuberculosis clinic, isolated to prevent contagion, cloaked in fog and superstition. But as war swept across Europe, the facility shifted. It became a holding place for those deemed troubled by the regime, the sick, the mad, the inconvenient. And in that transition, something darker was born. Official records of what occurred there were destroyed in 1945. But scattered testimonies, smuggled journal entries, and surviving photographs suggest experiments took place. Not medical, but metaphysical. Patients were subjected to forced sensory deprivation, buried alive for controlled intervals, even exposed to ancient religious symbols from conflicting faiths in rapid succession. The goal was unclear. The results, catastrophic. Survivors, if they can be called that, described figures without faces. Not hallucinations, but presences. Shadows that did not obey light. Some patients scratched symbols into their skin, identical spirals and circles, regardless of culture, language, or background. A psychologist who studied the symbols in 1961 compared them to Mesopotamian burial sigils. She hanged herself 2 months later. Her notes remain missing. After the ward was abandoned, or so it was claimed. In 1978, a Soviet satellite captured thermal readings from the area. Too precise, too regular to be geothermal. A KGB team was dispatched. Only one man returned, deaf, mute, with fingernails torn away and a phrase carved into his chest in Latin. Vox nullius. The voice of no one. No nation claimed the site afterward, but hikers still stumble upon it. What remains is a skeletal shell. Walls streaked with black mold, gurneys rusted to the floor, stained restraints still anchored to peeling leather. Some rooms appear untouched, as if waiting. In one chamber, clocks fill the shelves, none ticking, all stopped at the same time, 3:17 a.m. Visitors report overwhelming nausea, headaches, and a sense of drowning, despite no water in sight. Animals avoid it entirely. Birds fall silent. Wind refuses to touch its windows. One photograph, circulated among urban explorers, shows a woman standing in a hallway mirror. The problem? There was no woman in the building that day. No mirror on that wall. And the woman is wearing a nurse's uniform from 1912, her face entirely bandaged. A team of paranormal investigators entered in 2003. They live-streamed for 12 minutes, then static. Police found the cameras a week later, untouched, still recording, battery dead. Of the team, nothing was ever recovered. But perhaps the most disturbing account comes from a Romanian poet, Andrei Vasile, who claimed to have spent one night there alone. His last published words read, "There are voices that do not seek ears, only presence. I gave them mine. I am not alone. Anymore." He was found weeks later in Bucharest, alive, unresponsive, eyes inked entirely black. Some believe the ward is not haunted, but open. A threshold, not between life and death, but between thought and erasure, where reality grows thin and something else presses through, something that doesn't care for names or reason or mercy. It is not an evil place. Evil implies intent. The nameless ward is indifferent, a fracture in the structure of sanity, echoing not with screams, but with absence. Because the most terrifying sound is not a voice in the dark. It's the silence that answers back. History does not whisper. It roars. But only to those who know how to listen. To the cracks between facts, to the scars beneath monuments, to the places where the air itself seems heavier with memory. And if we've learned anything from this descent through the world's forgotten chambers, it's this. The past is not dead. It is not even past. It breathes, it lingers, and sometimes it waits. The human urge to forget is powerful. We pave over execution grounds and build cafes atop torture chambers. We hang fairy lights in former prisons, package tragedy as tourism. But beneath the varnish, the truth pulses, raw and unresolved. In the forests of Belarus, the soil still turns red in the spring, where thousands were executed in secret during Stalin's purges. In Cambodia's killing fields, bone fragments still rise to the surface after heavy rains. In Rwanda, beneath churches once deemed sanctuaries, the air hangs thick with a silence too heavy for prayer. These are not haunted places in the traditional sense. There are no chains rattling, no apparitions walking halls in period dress. These places are haunted by consequence, by the weight of human cruelty echoing through time, seeking not vengeance, but recognition. We build myths to explain away the unexplainable, ghosts, demons, curses. But perhaps the truth is more chilling, that some moments are so saturated with terror or grief, they fracture reality, and that fracture never quite heals. Instead, it bleeds, quietly, permanently. Maybe that's why we keep returning, why explorers search ruined asylums by flashlight, why divers descend into flooded cathedrals, why we read the final testimonies of the condemned even when we know how it ends. We're not chasing thrills. We're answering a call, one that echoes across centuries. There is a pattern, a pulse, places where history loops back on itself like a wound that cannot scab, where forgotten names scratch at the surface of time, refusing to be erased. And if you pay close attention, you'll see it too. The subtle shift in temperature, the way sound drops a beat too early, the sense of eyes where there should be none. In the catacombs beneath Paris, where 6 million dead are stacked in geometric reverence, tourists feel hands brush their backs in narrow passageways. In Japan's Aokigahara forest, compasses fail without explanation. In India's Bhangar fort, no structure has held past the second floor, as if something unseen always pushes back. These are not legends. These are places where human experience and cosmic silence collide, where the boundary between what happened and what still is becomes thin. And so we end where we began, not with a scream, but with a whisper from Povelia's ash-filled soil, from Bamberg's tolling bells, from the sea's eternal choir, from the pages that breathe, from the ward that forgets no name. They whisper not to scare, but to remind, that suffering leaves echoes, that memory, when buried, doesn't vanish. It deepens. And when we ignore it, when we look away, it waits. So the next time you pass an old building that feels too quiet, the next time you dream of a place you've never been, but wake with tears on your face, the next time history feels closer than it should, listen. You may just hear them, the echoes of the damned, and they have been waiting for you.